On.
Welcome back. Welcome in. This is Country Roads Confidential at earsports.com, a Paramount podcast. I am Mike Casazza, joined by Chris Anderson. Kind of a getaway day for me, Chris. I'm leaving you all by yourself. Well, not all by yourself. You'll have Andrew around as well, too, to put out the fires that are sure to pop up here. And boy, do we have one that we want to get into today. A couple of topics to discuss before I leave town and before the world continues to spin around here. A lot of stuff still happening in football, basketball, baseball beginning the postseason. Intimidating, exciting, I don't know, pick your own word, but it's going to be eventful too. And a couple of pretty obvious topics that have been on that front burner for a while. They remain there, Chris. And we kind of asked some people, hey, what can we talk about before we don't talk again for quite some time? Predictable with some topics. However, with the predictable topics comes an unpredictable development. Chris, tell me about Javon Small.
So you'll notice if you go through
Oh,
the commitment list, you go through them and look at the transfer commitments. It's hey, Sincere Harris commits on April 21st, announced as signed by the school on April 22nd. Same with Hansberry, same with a few other guys. You go through and you wait. Javon Small committed on May 1st. Today, checking my calendar here, May 20th. Mike, have you seen a press release come through that Javon Small has signed with WVU?
but I saw a tweet, Chris. I saw GIFs. Isn't that official?
It's not official enough,
What?
apparently, especially with transfers. So not in yet, not official yet. People, fans on our board have been asking, "Hey, what's going on? Hey, what's going on?" Last night, I get a message from out in Kansas. Get a message from back in Tennessee. Actually, I think Travis is out on the road right now for some of the big basketball camps, but two messages, similar stories, similar comments that Javon Small, who is currently verbally committed to West Virginia, may or may not be going on a visit to Kansas. Kansas may or may not be trying to swoop back in and steal him away from WVU. And then posted to our board, he may or may not be visiting West Virginia instead. Seems to be kind of all over the place, kind of poked around as much as possible, given the topic and the situation, with the new coaching staff and everything. And it's a lot to take in. It's kind of because in Morgantown, it's no. He's going to come visit. Everything's going to be fine. Academic calendar, this going to show up or sign that. Kansas and everywhere else, keep an eye on it. I'm hearing this. Keep an eye on it. I'm hearing this. And whenever everyone else is saying keep an eye on something, and WVU is trying to downplay it, you get a little concerned, Mike. If Javon Small goes somewhere else, how big of a deal does this end up being?
Oh man, I mean, this is their apart from Tucker DeVries, this is their big get, right?
Yeah.
Um, I wonder if he goes to Kansas and somebody whispers in his ear about how great Joseph Yasufu is. Just says, you don't want to mess with him. Guy's nasty. You're not going to play. Yasufu, bad news, man. You don't want to be there. Come here. It was too easy here for Yasufu, so it'll fit in for you, Javon Small. I wonder if that happens. It's a big deal, Chris. This is your combo guard who's actually a point guard, size, skill in the backcourt. I don't mean like combo guard as a point guard, but like he has the ability to also play point guard and score. And frequently, if you're familiar with some of the Bob Huggins teams, they've tried to shoehorn that combo guard in. And famously, it worked Javon Carter. It hasn't worked so well. Other people, kind of a frustration at times. But this is a guy who's long and big and maybe not the best defender, but certainly his offensive mind, and he can engineer an offense a little bit. In the past, he has at two different levels, Oklahoma State and then East Carolina before that. And again, this was not physically their biggest get, and even, qualitatively not their biggest get because of Tucker. But apart from that, I mean, it did a lot of things they wanted to do. And then if I had the sequence of events right, Chris, Eduardo Andre committed before, and then we were told, yeah, Javon Small is going to happen. And then within like 36 hours, Javon Small happened. I'm not sure what that does the apple cart there, but that's just how certain West Virginia was and people around it felt about this. And for that to be kind of upended right now, potentially, with so much time having passed in what's a difficult position to prioritize and then effectively recruit. That would be a negative. And I mean, obviously the biggest negative. The other thing I think about, Chris, is it the only negative so far in this roster building? The turnover, I get that. That's a negative in general. I'm not sure how much milk was spilled there and that you would really offer tears over. But apart from that, like not a lot of like guys who visited and whiffed, like Aiton Wright and Connor Enright were here, ended up somewhere else. I was surprised they got away and didn't commit, but then I was not surprised that they ended up committing to like DePaul and North Texas instead of West Virginia. Um, so yeah, that's surprising. I wouldn't call that a negative. This would be a big negative. And I guess my question then would be, is it so far the only one? Never mind the biggest one, but how many other negatives are in this conversation? A really complex, involved, and lengthy roster rebuild.
Are you stressing so far because, and I'm ducking here, I'm ducking if anybody's watching this video, because Yesufu has also not signed yet, and it's been over a week.
I this Twitter thing and spiking the football with graphics, it doesn't always go wrong. It infrequently goes wrong. It does happen though, where football teams, basketball teams, I'm sure soccer teams, volleyball teams, ice hockey teams have a little bit of premature exuberance about these things. And it gets people worked up about it too. And I can remember, oh, I don't know, Chris, 10 years ago, where like you didn't really have transfers, period, but also commitments. I don't know, before like maybe it's our fault. Maybe it's 24/7, but people really want to party before the party. And sometimes it gets you into spots like this. So now, I mean, yeah, you'd have to look at this and say, that's odd. Why hasn't Yusufu signed? And then you start going down the list, like, wait a minute, I haven't seen, this from this person every time it happens. And I don't know, it's just one of those things. As a fan, would you like to have that, 15, 20 minutes of anticipation before a player commits once a coach has that GIF out, right? That's kind of a fun time on Twitter, typically late at night. Um, you probably feel a lot better if you saw the press release and the email with a signed grant and aid. Not the way it works anymore, though.
And especially with transfers, with high school recruits, yeah, they verbally commit, they stay verbally committed for a long time, usually. And then there's National Signing Day, and they sign actual paperwork that binds them to the school weeks and sometimes months before they ever actually enroll. With transfers, there's no need for that. There is no letter of intent. It's simply signing the paperwork as they're enrolling, like the actual paperwork that you will actually not even enrollment, and which has caused some issues with some reports over the years where people say, "Hey, so and so has enrolled at this school." You know what? These transfers, especially guys that are, hey, I got to make a decision in the next week and get to a school in the next week, they will quote unquote enroll at several schools. They will go through the admissions process to make sure all of that paperwork is done, but not sign the financial aid paperwork that gives them the scholarship and binds them to the school until sometimes quite literally the day they are about to enroll. So the transfer stuff can really take it up right up to the deadest of deadlines, like right at the last second. And so some of these transfers you're not going to see do anything until they get in. With Small, these next 72 hours are big.
Ooh, yeah.
And I say that, or 48. Today is May 20th, Monday, May 20th. It is 9:30 in the morning on the East Coast. The dead period for basketball starts May 22nd. At that point, even transfers are no longer allowed to go visit schools. You can finish your visit on May 22nd. So if somebody starts a visit today, they can leave on the 22nd and still be spoken with and everything like that. But once you get to that point, it's over. That's done. That there's no more visits until, was it a couple more weeks? It's a couple weeks of that dead period. But by that point, you're hoping your transfers are enrolled at school, because the other transfers and even some of the high school kids, I think Jonathan Powell also told me that he would be in Morgantown around June 1st.
Yeah.
So that'll be during the dead period. So if West Virginia can make it the next 48 hours, if they can be the one that gets him on campus instead of Kansas right before this dead period, I think Mountaineer fans can feel a little bit better about it, and in hopes that he just actually ends up signing.
Can give you a little bit more of a brown paper bag for people to use too. Oklahoma State's finals week is May 6th through 10. The grades were due Wednesday last week, Chris, and then your final grades on transcripts are to be posted on Friday the 17th. Postgraduate transfers, that doesn't even matter anymore, so it's not like you need that. However, you'd like to know that you actually have the numbers that can translate from one school to another. You have the progress toward graduation, the GPA. You're eligible. Lord knows West Virginia does not want a player to come to West Virginia and not be available to play. Was frustrating before. Why do that again? So there are some procedural academic things that actually do sometimes stand in the way of athletic progress. Um, that's the break sometimes too. So looking at the calendar here, it's one of those situations where you're saying, could this be an academic thing? Not like he's got bad academics, but you just have to cross out, check whatever you want to say, certain things. Well, what would that calendar look like? It look a lot like this, where the grades aren't due until the 15th. They're not posted on the transcript until the 17th. And here we are, Chris, on the 20th. That might make some sense too. However, it's more concerning that a possible visit to another Big 12 school stands as an obstacle as well.
Yeah, I cannot remember for the life of me the actual numbers on this, so I'm not going to even start saying them. But to your point about the academics, like when somebody says in regards to transfers, like, hey, they got to get the academics in order. Hey, they got to get the academics in order. It's not that they are failing at their previous school or anything like that. It is,
Yeah,
God, what I'm trying to remember who it was. There was a cornerback, a transfer cornerback that West Virginia was recruiting, had up on a visit. Um, and God, I think his last name was Newton. He ended up at Kansas State or TCU, and I'm blanking right now. But
Josh Newton.
there you go. And he was supposed to, like, West Virginia wanted him. Problem was he came up to West Virginia, and the way the credits were going to transfer and how it was going to work, because West Virginia and many other schools require that you take a certain number of credits to finish out in order to get your degree from West Virginia. You can't show up and only take, 1 3-hour course and get a West Virginia degree. So he was showing up and say he was, again, I'm throwing out numbers here just as an example. You need 120 hours to graduate. He was at 115, and then West Virginia was basically going to ask him to go back to 90 and retake extra classes in order to graduate from WVU. And that was a big reason why he did not end up at West Virginia. Um, West Virginia is not alone in that. That happens a lot of places. It all just kind of depends on how things line up with your credits and what transfers where. So maybe that's coming into play with Small again. This is when people say academics, that's what they're talking about, not that he's failing his courses, miserably or something.
Chris, my phone right now is very interesting. This is starting to get out a little bit. People are starting to talk about it, and suddenly, after days of silence, phones are working. So
Yeah, funny.
good to know. A lot of like we should talk things. So should continue.
All right. Well, should we talk about something else then, and we'll circle back on that later?
Well, let's stick to our brand here, Chris.
Mhm.
Panic meter.
Okay, okay,
It's a setback. It's hard to backfill this one if this does
right.
go somewhere else. However, man, you pulled Javon Small right now. Man, the momentum is that meter is broken. You got great things going in your direction. So everything you said about this being a really important period of time, I think you said 72 hours. There's a lot in the line for myriad reasons, and by no means would this derail the DeVries debut, first season, the getting to know you phase, honeymoon period, whatever you want to say. If it doesn't go well, like if you don't get Javon Small, you don't pop the balloon and say bad idea. If you do get him right now, despite whatever is happening right now, I think you can kind of plant a flag and say, okay, things are going to be good. Again, not broken and not fixed based on what happens here, but it does feel like that it's right there now. It could go either way, but you feel really good if through whatever real or fabricated angst exists right now, exaggerated or realistic. If they can pull this off and get him to sign or visit and then sign, man, what a feat on the desk kind of a moment where you'd say, yeah, this is good. This feels good.
Right. Small is a known quantity, a known commodity, I think is where we're getting at here. So if you have him, that helps in a big way. If you lose him, it may not be the end of the world. You have other options. There are other guys in the portal. There are other guards that West Virginia has contacted. Um, there's just not a known commodity quite like Small out there,
No.
at least not available anymore. And then you look at a guy like Yasufu, again, who has not signed. I'm not trying to jinx it, just pointing out, also has not signed. Um, but hey, the big thing when he committed, it was like, hey, this guy has been a career backup. And we said right from the beginning, you can't sign 13 starters, 13 transfers and tell them they're all going to start. You need guys who can fill the different roles. And when Yasufu committed, it was, hey, this is great. This is a guy who knows how to come off the bench, who knows how to be productive off the bench. If Small's gone, now you got to talk yourself into, hey, you know, Kansas wanted Yasufu for a reason. Now it's time for him to shine. He could be a starter. And that's not wildly unreasonable to start trying to talk yourself into that or think that that is a potential move or a potential answer there. It's just not as comfortable as sure of a thing as adding a Javon Small.
Then you just get on Google and you Google like, did Aiton Wright sign with North Texas? And you just try to figure out like maybe guys who you were with before. If this happened to you, could have happened somewhere else, has it happened somewhere else? And I wonder how deep they go in the recruiting process here, and do you make sure that they cross the finish line, but also then like, actually sign everything and submit everything, or is somebody available that maybe you thought wasn't? Layers to this, Chris. Aiton Wright has signed with North Texas, by the way. I'm not throwing that out there, but he actually has signed.
Okay. All right. So then the next thing that was thrown our direction to discuss during this podcast, it almost turned into a Q&A with the way people kind of flooded that thread, but I think it's better to do it this way because there were several questions about filling out the rest of the roster. Obviously, if Javon Small is out, I think you're adding an extra, point guard type, combo guard type that you're trying to then get. But other than that, three more spots. Big man, I think is a no doubter. Trying to find another serviceable big man. That's something we've been talking about at length. Finding somebody, a shooter. Again, somebody that maybe comes off the bench, somebody who can shoot from distance with regularity. And then a high schooler, I guess. Again, this past weekend was a big weekend to go out and evaluate. It was the last full weekend to get out and evaluate high school recruits. Um, Mike, where are you leaning here? Anything specific other than that for the last couple spots?
Yeah. So last time we answered this question, I was not so much looking at like um positions, whatever, but like skill and strengths as opposed to a one or two or four or anything like that. So someone who can let's say Small is out and you get a small comp. Let's just go with the three positions you need, because if they lose Small, they're gonna have to get a point guard. So that's a non-starter for me. So with the three spots, then I would still like some size, whether it's a 6'10" guy or a guy who's like 6'9", 260, something like that. I just want someone who's big and can hang around at the basket. And I still want that shooter who can get me some points off the bench and who can deal with a lot of attention going to Tucker DeVries, and who can catch the ball off reverse. Just a shooter. That's all. I think about this last one though, Chris, and I was going into last year's roster and how a guy like Josiah Harris was in between, because he wasn't a three, but neither was Raekwon Battle, but wasn't a note for note backup, and he wasn't like a backup for Quinn Slazinski. And you didn't have that positional repeat when you had a bench guy come in. So if he came in for one of those two, it wasn't the same. And he wasn't quite fast enough to be a three, wasn't quite that big enough to be a four. Do they have that balance right now, Chris? Do they have somebody who can come in and fill in for DeVries or fill in for, I don't know, let's say Okani or whomever, and just keep things going where it doesn't miss a beat? Whereas if you do make a change, and you're not only changing your roster and your personnel, but you're changing how you play or how you guard, because you don't have the same size, strength, skill, ability in that sub. Is that like how you're reinventing the wheel on the fly? And I'm not sure that's great. So I get into that last maybe two spots, and I'm trying to make sure I actually just need depth. So get a big guy, but if I have somebody who's coming off the bench, can he do an impersonation of the starter or of the backup, right? And keep this thing on track where we don't have to sub. And for it's 4 to 6 minutes, let's say it's immediate timeout. But who knows what happens there? It comes off the rails, and you're down 6 points when you were up two before the change. I think about that sometimes now too, because you can be a little bit more creative when you get this deep into the process. You got 10, 11 guys. Yeah, you can get a high school guy with 12, but like this not carbon copy, but someone who does an impression that's reasonable, acceptable for you too. So maybe now you're just backfilling with depth there. And yeah, for me, how many high school guys, Chris? Two right now. You figure Ofri Neve, Hansbury, Harris are sophomores. That's five guys in 2 years. That's pretty good. So even then, do you have to have a freshman? Chris, what are the chances those three freshmen are going to be here in 4 years? What are the chances two freshmen are going to be here in 4 years? What are the chances one freshman is going to be here in 4 years? So I'm not even sure how important that is right now, too. I think it's a good point of concern that you can certainly vet and try to figure out if you want to do. But just the hit rate on transfer for 4 years, totally a different game now. I like it if you can do it. Not a priority for me, though.
I like the idea of essentially getting, of course, it'd be better if you got better versions of what you already got at the certain spots, but more realistically,
Yeah.
you're going to be getting slightly lesser versions of what you already have. And I like that idea of kind of trying to stay consistent instead of something wildly different than what you have and having to, up, wait, now this person's coming in and we have to completely change the way we play because of it. So I'm with you on that. I hadn't really thought about that, but I'm with you on that. I like that idea.
No.
Um, moving on to the next topic. Let's talk. Hey, Mike, reach into that CBS shirt you got there and get your recruiting card
Oh.
out, please. Get
Oh.
it ready.
Oh
Um,
God.
we're going to talk about the summer camp schedule. Yeah, don't mess up your microphone. We're going to talk about the summer camp schedule. We got several questions about that. I'm going to go more in depth, like position by position, leading up to the first camps up on the site. But I think it is cool for us to talk about it. We don't usually talk about the summer recruiting camps. That's usually like more of a very specific um, audience that's looking for that there, and we go VIP with that. But let's talk camp schedule, Mike. You're a veteran of the
Yeah.
recruiting camp scene. Um, what kind of thing? What's most important to you when you are getting out there and seeing some of these guys?
I think I want to look at, I don't know how you would qualify this, Chris, or how you'd even do this, but who are people who might have said, whether it's schools or coaches or even players, who you reached out to them this time last year and you said, hey, what do you think about coming in? Nah, can't get a bus. Doesn't work in our schedule. Then you go 8-4 and you beat UNC in a bowl game you weren't supposed to be in, but you got in because your offense was so cool. Now you call them now and you say, hey, remember that time we called you last year and you said, nah, what do you think about this year? Like, I wonder how many no's turn to yeses or how many turn to yeah, I'm in. I wonder what type of boost they got based on having a good season and having, the good vibes and a lot of potential, all that stuff that I think people agree is present right now and ideally would be useful. And is this one of those ways you could qualify and say, yeah, this has been good for us because blank, we got this bus from Baltimore to come in, or we got this group of people from Georgia who were on their way to Ohio State, but they're going to stop here for a day too, or on their way back or whatever. I think that'd be an interesting analysis to do, and that would require somebody smarter than me to do. Going to have some cooperation there, but I think that'd be a promising thing too. And then I don't know, Chris, just like their skill talent is sneaky. Like they've had some good running backs, they have some good receivers. The quarterback thing, all of a sudden, I think is a lot more appealing for that next gen because Garrett Green kind of stuck with it for a couple years, but that looks like a pretty fun way to play and a pretty fun position to play. And it's not just like a stand back in the pocket, slinging around. Athletes at quarterback in high school, not unusual. Sometimes they're corners, sometimes they're receivers in college, but sometimes athletes want to be athletes too. And can they spike their recruiting at the skill positions or perhaps, I don't know, just a quarterback? I think those are two things I try to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and a couple things that have changed over the years. I've been sitting. Yeah, I was about to say I've been sitting there on the field watching these for the last 13 years, but um, for those that have been around that long over here at 24/7 Sports and Your Sports,
Mhm.
in the early years there were some very strict rules about where we were allowed to stand, and
Mhm.
so there's a lot of photos and videos from about halfway up the bleachers for some of those early camps because we were not allowed
Right.
anywhere near what was going on. Don't know why, but there's personal preference of the time, I suppose. Um, that's changed, but the other thing that's really changed is you're really not going to see, last year we got to see Khalil Wilkins, the quarterback that ended up signing with West Virginia. that was a special circumstance where West Virginia kind of went into the summer without a quarterback commit, which is not going to happen this year. Scotty Fox, who camped last year multiple times, is already committed. But it is pretty rare to see the current class recruits or legitimate targets in action. Um,
Yep.
and the big reason is a lot of those guys you've already identified. You already identified most of those guys, and the guys that you really want, they already have 5, 6, 7, 10, 12 offers, and they will, for better or worse, look at schools and say, "Hey, I already got offers. Why do I need to work out?" And that's changed. So, for this being this, it's the summer of 2024, so the current class is 2025. Most of the guys that are going to be the big focus in the camps are going to be 2026 and 2027 recruits. That's changed over the years. I mean, it used to be, I still remember when Da'Keil Shorts and Wendell Smallwood walked up and ready to work out. I
Yep.
still remember Shelton Gibson coming in with his 7-on-7 team and ready to play. Now, again, that's a little bit different because it's your 7-on-7. You're playing with your high school team, so you will see a few more marquee recruits at that, depending on if their high school comes. And West Virginia's done a nice job of. It used to be one really long 2-day event that was honestly miserable, but now it's two separate 1-day events, which makes it a little more palatable, especially if the weather cooperates. So you can see more guys, more teams can come in, and that's really I, those are my favorite days. Those 7-on-7s, not like one. I like to see the competitive nature of those 7-on-7 games and then the tournaments, but also because that's when you can really pay attention to who the coaches are focused on.
Yeah.
Because at the 1-day recruiting camps, a lot of time the coaches are working, graduate assistants and student assistants and recruiting guys, they're all helping out throughout the 1-day camps. But the coaches are also very much involved in the drills. They're working with all the campers at these 7-on-7 tournaments. Most of the assistant coaches, they're just kind of hanging out, kind of watching, talking to guys. So you'll be sitting here with 4, 6 different games going on of high school 7-on-7 games, and you just look over and there's 3 WVU assistant coaches talking to 3 separate recruits on the sideline. And with these high school teams, they might play at 9 a.m. and then not play again till 11 a.m. So then they have that time in between, and all of a sudden you see them sneaking off with one of the coaches, going to get a tour of the facilities in between their games. And those are the kind of things that's like, yep, noted. Take note of that. That guy's a target, and that's what makes a lot of these fun.
I think something else to watch too is there are not four new assistant coaches, but two from last year, two from this year who are new. Blaine Stewart, Bilal Marshall, Vic Cabral, Tyler Allen. What does their haul look like? Who are they bringing in? Like, what does that addition do? Um, like, I think it's really interesting what Marshall is doing at receiver. It seems like a lot of people are pretty excited about playing for him, and all of a sudden, players are great ambassadors for recruiting too. And frequently, sometimes you'll see players on campus during these events too. There's rules for that, but I wonder what Marshall gets into, and I wonder Cabral about edge rushers or people from Georgia that he knows. That could be two sources of talent: someone he knows from that area, or someone that he has an idea and a prospect of what it's look like in his defense. What did that look like? And Allen's been around Brown for a while, knows what he likes, and quarterback recruiting is very specific. What will his touch um, do for this position in recruiting too? That's something else probably just to track. And it might be a year before you actually see it for a guy like Allen or Cabral, but maybe the time is right now for Marshall or Stewart because their honeymoon period, their getting to know you phase is kind of over. And now it's time for them from when they got the job last year to being there now, developing relationships, convincing people to consider West Virginia. They can actually follow through on that right now. So, you'll see like the infancy of someone like Cabral or Allen, and you'll see a little bit more advance from someone like Marshall.
All right, Mike, last topic that several people brought up. We got about 6 or 7 minutes here. Revenue sharing. How does it work? How would you allocate? I mean, we probably could have dedicated an entire podcast to this because this is going to get weird. I don't know if we have all the answers yet because it's such in its infancy, but can you give us a quick breakdown of what's happening here, what's being discussed?
Cannot. Listen, I mean, the stuff you're reading online is from the inside, and that's being leaked for specific purposes to people because known sources of the stories and information, people who are, very capable of reporting it in digestible, understandable ways. So continue to read that stuff because it's good reporting. It's good reporting. It's coming out from the people who have it and who want it to get out in the right bites and sizes. So stick with that. What does it mean? How does it look? Those are two very different things right now. And Chris, like, I guess my big question is what exactly is revenue? Because revenue at Ohio State is going to be different than revenue at West Virginia. And if you're sharing a percentage of that revenue, that is not equitable. That's not going to help anything either. So is it revenue from TV contracts? Is it revenue from gate? Is it revenue from third party sponsorships? Is it just revenue in general? I don't know if they'll define any of that stuff. I don't know. So, everybody in the Big 12 gets equal revenue from television. Actually, that's not true because I think they still tier in the partners when they arrive from different conferences. So even that's going to be slanted. I don't know how they're going to define revenue. And then just the big thing for me, Chris, that I don't know how they do this is well, two things, I suppose. One is the Title IX issue. Don't know. I mean, there are people who are going to interpret Title IX as equal opportunities, which is very different from equal compensation. Like if you have an opportunity to play sports in Title IX, that's all that matters. And what you do with that opportunity is individual and not institutional. And if a gymnast is making a lot of money because of her NIL and a backup safety isn't, well, why should the backup safety be able to make the same money that the gymnast is? Now, see what I did? I turned that on you a little bit, right? Because if the star quarterback makes so much, but the backup small forward on the women's basketball team doesn't, well, whose fault is that, right? So I don't know how they're going to term equity and opportunity and equity and compensation with Title IX. There's different debates on that. And then just the cap. How does the cap work? Because if you have a cap, you're going to run into antitrust. And I think that's why the NCAA is looking for some sort of protection against antitrust in the future. And I honestly don't know why people would provide the NCAA with that, because unless they do something where they can like revisit this regularly, like they do with TV contracts, that cap is going to be a contentious part of things unless you come to a collective bargaining thing, which I'm just not sure how enthusiastic or even interested or invested or informed people are about that particular topic. It's a lot to it, Chris.
Can't imagine how big a fight there's going to be about all of this because just think back to this USA Today database where they report on revenues, expenses, profits. And what was it, 4 or 5 years ago? We referenced that report or that database
Mhm.
and said West Virginia made a profit. I, I'm pretty sure someone tried to knock down my door and or like shock me, arrest me the moment the story went up. Like schools push back on those all the time, all the time. And there's always, I mean, anybody that gets into any kind of accounting knows there's a million different ways you can make things look a million different ways. So I don't even know how you would, like you said, what's revenue? How are we going to figure this out? Are you going to force every single school to abide by the same accounting rules? What about universities who are private and don't have to report those numbers? Are you going to force them to report those numbers? Like you said, are you just going to make it, hey, just the TV revenue, all the other revenue we don't care about. We're just going to split the TV revenue. It's going to be. I mean, I just everybody's kind of talking about this. Hey, look at this and this. It's getting leaked out, and some of the people on our board are thinking this might be something that gets fixed or not fixed, but implemented within a couple years. I think this is going to be a long, drawn out fighting process between the schools and whatever governing bodies involved.
What's kind of funny, Chris, is like how it's funny when you think about where we are now and how crazy this future looks. I think back to 2011. I just started at the Daily Mail a couple years earlier, but the conference expansion was happening. Things are realigning, and everybody was starting to realize, wow, there's a lot of money on the table that is not going to players or programs. And there was a group of, I don't know, maybe like players from football and basketball players from 4 or 5 or 6 schools, maybe like 200, 300 people. And they had a petition to the NCAA just to share some of the media revenue with the players. And here we are, Chris, talking about like 17 to $22 million in a cap. And back then, the NCAA said no to this petition that was asking for like $2,500. $3,000 on a scholarship, like a cost of living stipend. And that may be how we ended up getting to the cost of living stipends that came few years later, which people forget about now. But how different could things have been if the NCAA hadn't been so stubborn and just refusing to yield any power or income and just said, yeah, $2,500, that's great. Like, and then just in the corner, like, oh my God, I can't believe they actually fell for that, right? Because now look at this, back damages in excess of $2 billion if they settle, which we'll see. Like, there's some whispers that there's not a lot of harmony about, you know, which schools pay how much or why schools are paying so much or how they're going to do it for back damages. Who knows? I think it'll happen fast, but it's gonna be very different and very. I just don't know if people realize how significant this is. Like the stuff you read is just like it's another language, Chris. It's not what you're used to at all. So, yeah, hopefully that happens when I'm gone because I don't really want to spend a lot of ink and keystrokes on that. There's a lot to cover there, which you're right. 8, 9 minutes in here, not enough. Probably could do a whole episode. I'm not sure how much people want to pay attention to that because it can be kind of boring. But man, it's certainly different, is it not?
It is, and it's funny you said could have been out if the NCAA hadn't been so stubborn. Well, it always seems to come back to that, huh? The
Mhm.
NCAA wasn't so stupid, if they weren't so stubborn, if they weren't so whatever. Yeah, could have been different.
In the meantime, Chris, hold it down. I'm sure that nothing will happen and everything will be peaceful, and you won't have to worry about players flip-flopping commitments or Division I sports falling apart. Nothing in the
Eh,
middle either. Nice,
be
easy row
fine.
until I get back. Good luck to you. Good luck to Andrew. Until then, I'm Mike Casaza.
And I'm Chris Anderson.
We will talk to you then.